I know this is an afternoon session. You know, I fully understand. I've been out there sitting in those seats before. You know, and I know it's hard. You just got finished with lunch. Just got finished. You know, listening to the speaker. Coming up here in the afternoon. You know, it's time's kind of counting down to the end of the day. But certainly we'll try to make this as informative and we're going to try to run this a little bit informally, basically. So if at any point during my presentation you have any questions, just raise your hand, shout out John, hey you, any of those things basically, and we'll certainly try to address your question at that point. So little informal. We are going to have a couple of guest speakers as well come up from the state who have implemented some of these things. So we'll be giving them introductions as well. But like I said, this is a little bit more of an informal discussion, kind of focused on vendor partnerships. So you'll see some carryover of some of the things that were talked about. Well, first of all, before I do that, how many folks were in the morning session? Show of hands. Okay. There will be some carryover of some of the things that were talked about during that session. You'll see them kind of reinforced with perhaps a slightly different flavor to them. If you weren't there at that session, it's not a big deal. There's nothing that, you'll just avoid having that, communication is key beaten into you several times, as well as project sponsorship. So, you only hear it once instead of twice. So, so with that, I'm going to get started. Like I said, the focus of this session is a little bit more detailed. We're going to be talking about some practical things you can do to set vendor expectations early throughout the project life cycle, and what are some of the typical types of things you'll see roles and responsibilities wise between a vendor and a state. So with that, I'm going to get started, unless anybody has any questions now. Give me a second. All right. So like I said, what we're going to be talking about, we're going to do some introductions to recognize some of the folks who've helped out in putting together this presentation. It's broken up into a couple of parts. So you'll see we're going to go through the first 5 for the first hour, and then we're going to go through the second 3 of these basically in kind of the second hour. We're going to discuss the purpose and intent of this presentation. We're going to talk about, and it kind of is broken up into the life cycle of a project. So we're going to kind of talk about, well, what happens during the RFP development phase. We're going to talk about what happens during initial project setup. We're going to talk about some of the typical project life cycle activities you'll see as you move through a project. Just show of hands, how many folks are currently working on projects right now? Okay, pretty much everybody. Okay. How many folks have been involved with developing RFPs in the past? All right, pretty much everybody too. Okay. All right, just trying to set level set about what the experience is out there. With that being said, I did want to acknowledge, and I just saw Christy just came in, so I see Christy just sat down, the work of the Project Advisory Board, who had a big part in putting this together. Melody Hayes, basically, who's the Deputy Director for Benefits and Enrollment Technology Support for OSI, which is one of the organizations Carlos pointed out this morning during his talk. Basically, she's not here today, but we do have Jay Song, who was very nice about doing a case study. Basically, he's the Chief Technology Officer for California Highway Patrol, and did a nice case study as well as participated in our panel discussion this morning. And then Christy Borchin, basically, who's in the back over there. Thank you, Christy. Who is the Deputy Director for the Office of Professional Development for California Department of Technology, basically. So, and then I did also want to acknowledge Nishant Agrawal, who's our VIP Project Advisor Board member. Visionary Integration Professional is not a very important person. So, just to clarify.
But I do like to consider myself a very important person.
He's also my boss. So if you have any complaints, you can direct them to him, and he'll be glad to answer them for you. We are, like I said, we are going to have a couple of presenters and speakers. I'm going to be doing some talking during this thing, so I'll try not to be too boring. I know sometimes I tend to go a little fast and talk a little fast, or so let me know if you miss something. We're going to have Isla Parasek, basically, who is in the front table over here. She is the manager of IT acquisitions for California Department of Motor Vehicles. So, and she's going to be talking a little bit about request for information, if anybody's ever been involved in that process. And we also have, of course, Curtis Knapp, who is the director for the Electronic Benefits Transfer Project, one of the major projects at OSI and also with the Health and Human Services Agency. And he's doing double duty. He has also participated in the morning session, so I want to thank him for doing that. And he's also going to come up and be talking to us about some of the best practices he's experienced for vendor partnership and vendor management. All right. So like I said, my name is John Gunnufsen. You know, I am the one of the directors for state and local government for Visionary Integration Professionals, VIP Consulting. We're a local, well, not just local now, but we've been local to the Sacramento area for quite a number of years now. I personally have about 20 years of experience, mainly focused on either project management, IV&V, independent verification and validation, if anybody's familiar with that, as well as quality assurance for various different projects on the state. I've worked basically, you know, I counted them up basically as part of putting this together, putting this bio together. There are about 20 different projects that I had worked on over my career, basically, and worked with a little bit over 10 different California departments or agencies. Now you might look at that and say, 20 years, 20 projects. Obviously, this is someone who can't keep a job. So, you know, just to rest assured, several times I've worked on multiple projects at once. So I used to work on 2 or 3 projects at a time, basically part-time on different ones. So that's how that math works out. So with that, what is the purpose and intent of this session? And like I said, really the intent is to define some strategies, you know, kind of based on what has been done on other projects. You know, I've kind of, like I said, I've been on about 20 different projects, so I've seen a lot of different things, and there are also a lot of good things that have been developed, basically by Department of Technology, by, you know, Office of System Integration as far as best practices, as far as DMV. So there's a lot of different things that have been developed out there regarding vendor management. And we're going to go through some of those in a little bit more detail and discuss some of those things that may have been part of procurements at a particular department or agency, but may not be widespread across the state. So we're going to go through some of those. It's going to be fairly in-depth. We're going to be, to some extent, throwing some spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks. So you might hear a lot of different concepts as we're going through this. You know, and the core is that vendor management is really something that goes throughout the life cycle of a project, basically. It really starts, you know, even before the vendor or the SI is on board. It starts with developing an RFP, basically, that clearly defines, you know, the what of what's needed, what's the business need, how is it you're going to have a vendor come in to meet that business need. And it goes basically all the way through, you know, implementation and maintenance and operations. You know, we're going to be focusing on basically about 4 different kind of areas, and we'll talk about them throughout the different life cycle phases, but we're going to talk about setting clear expectations on all sides, not just for what the vendor's responsibilities are, but what are the state's responsibilities? What's the responsibility of interface partners, if you have those that might be dealing with you? What's the responsibility of various divisions or other departments within your organization that might not be part of the project, but are critical to the overall success of the project? So we're going to be talking about some of those types of things. Consistent involvement, basically, which is always key to any project. We're going to be talking about communication and escalation, and, you know, to the extent possible, always having a core group of folks who are always involved in the project. And that includes, like I said, not only the direct project staff or the direct vendor staff, but, you know, also, like I said, the other departments that are involved in making this project a success, the interface partners that are involved in that, how to define roles and responsibilities among all those different organizations, which is the second one, defining roles and responsibilities. And we're also going to touch a little bit on, basically, incentivized performance, which, you you know, as a vendor, and also, you know, I started my career in the Air Force, so I've kind of seen two different sides of it. But incentivized performance for vendor percentage is mainly about money. So we'll talk about compensation a little bit and how that perhaps gets involved in incentivizing performance. This is just a little graphic that kind of highlights some of the things we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about building in quality throughout the process. We're going to be talking about during the RFP phase, during the project startup phase, what are the typical project lifecycle activities that are done. Then when we pick up again, we're going to talk about communication escalation, there we go. As well as we're going to talk about deliverable review processes and what to do when you have deliverables that are rejected. So, you know, a lot of, you know, there are, especially for large projects, there are a lot of different deliverables that the vendor might be providing. In some cases, there might be over 100, you know, on really large projects, over 100 deliverables that are coming in. And so it's a substantial amount of work to review those things and how to make sure those things, you set the foundation so that those things are, there's a joint agreement about what the expectations are for that deliverable that you can hold the vendor accountable for, and is also used by the state as well as far as making sure that the deliverable meets their needs. Okay. And this is by no means an exhaustive list of key things to consider during the RFP phase, but these are just a couple of key points that I put in here. Just kind of things to consider when you're going through an RFP. One of which is basically what's called a request for information, which is usually something that goes out before the RFP. Has anybody ever been involved in an RFI? All right, good amount. Okay, good. So this is not something that I think it's been used on several large projects. It's been used at a few different departments and agencies, but not necessarily widespread, I think. So, what that does, it's a document that you send out to basically do market research, vendor marketplace research. And it can be, the level of detail can vary depending on what information you're trying to get out there from the vendor community. And it's a good way to inform, or it could be a good way to inform your RFP, basically, as you're developing that. It can consist of, you're basically looking to get feedback on potentially high-level requirements or business functions that you're looking at doing. And like I said, the level of detail is really set by the information you're looking to gain. Like I said, it's been used by several different projects have gone through, especially some of the larger projects, or not even just the larger, but several projects have gone through this. We're going to have Isla come up and talk about her experience doing this at DMV. Board of Equalization has issued RFIs. CDSS has done RFIs for particular things. The second thing, basically, we're looking at is use of confidential discussions, which, obviously, usually these occur between a draft proposal and a final proposal. But I just wanted to emphasize these because, to tell you the truth, written communication is an imperfect way to talk back to each other, basically. So, and I understand that the RFP process is a very structured process. It's kind of like you can't, there's only a certain amount of things you can do. And all of it's in writing. I used to have one of my old contract managers used to say, I can see a lot better than I can hear, basically. So if it's not something that he can see on the paper written down, it's not as important as what you're telling him, basically. And I certainly understand that, but I think it is a very good way to really clarify what the expectations are and what the business needs are, and understand and to provide that type of mechanism to really provide the vendor community a good understanding of what you're really trying to get out of something and what you mean by a particular requirement. Because even as specific as you write requirements, you can usually get 3 or 4 people and they'll have a different opinion about what that requirement actually means. And it's sometimes a lot simpler when you're actually sitting down with someone to clarify that than it is to clarify it in writing. Obviously, it's a good thing to do if you have the time to do that within your procurement cycle, and it really does mitigate the risk of disqualifications or getting no responses because they didn't understand what the requirement was. And most certainly large procurements have set up so that you can do confidential discussions as part of that between the draft and the finals. Did I lose anybody? Okay. And this is the next one is something that was touched on by Carlos, I think, in the morning speech. It was also touched on in the discussion this morning. Basically, was the need to invest in documenting what your current processes are. There's a lot of institutional knowledge within the state about how things are actually done. And a lot of that is really undocumented. It's not something that there's been a lot of analysis, basically, or analysis was done, but it was done, 10 years ago or so. And it really does provide a good context for when you have a very good bidder's library that kind of fully articulates how the state currently goes about business for a given department, and how those functions are currently carried out, and what the governance structure is associated with the various departments and everything else. So I think investing in documenting what those current processes are very critical. And they did this, an extensive effort at Franchise Tax Board with the EDR project, the Enterprise Data to Revenue, basically to really, and they have done this also for BOE as well, basically, to really document what those as-is processes are, so that to both inform the vendor and basically also to have them ready when they started the project. And it was a large undertaking. I'm not going to say that it's not. It required a lot of effort by a lot of people within that organization, but it did really benefit, basically. And like I said, it really aids the vendors in understanding kind of the subtext of why you may be asking for certain things in the RFP. Because you can kind of look at those current flows and you say, okay, now I get what it is they're trying to say. Any questions? All right. Another couple of key things that I put in here, basically. We're talking about incentivized performance, basically. And like I said, for a vendor, this all comes down to money and how they get paid. And so the intent is to basically clearly define, what are those pay points, and basing them on something that's, logical and makes sense, basically, so that you're rewarding them for when they produce a high quality product, and you're not rewarding them when they don't produce a high quality product. So there have been a couple of instances where projects have used, balanced scorecards, basically. They did this on the child support project, a very large project several years ago. Basically, they did this. They have done it also at, like I said, Franchise Tax Board on the EDR project, where it's a process where, on a regular basis, the project assesses performance of the vendor, and there's a certain potentially compensation associated with how well they're performing. It can be it's usually a combination of, kind of objective type metrics to assess, well, are they responding to high criticality issues? Is the level of staffing appropriate for what we thought it was going to be? Are they, schedule-wise, are they performing on schedule? Are they performing on cost? Those types of things. It's always nice to make it as objective as possible. The other way is basically you define pay points for vendors based on either milestones, like you completed requirements validation or requirements decomposition, or you completed design, or you completed testing, or something like that. Reviews, basically. So in the Air Force, they had a concept called critical design reviews, functional design reviews. Basically, they had these different gate points that were out there, and that's another way to do compensation streams. The other thing is basically it's appropriate for the type of solution that you're looking to get. And sometimes you don't know what type of solution you're looking to get, but usually a commercial off-the-shelf product has a little bit different life cycle than a custom developed project. There's a different mix of when you need staff in those types of projects. The same is true for a software as a service type project. That's also different. So it's always going to be tailored to some extent to meet the particular RFP that you're doing. It's also one of the things you could include as part of doing an RFI, to understand what the sentiment is out there from the vendor community around compensation. And then the last part of this chart basically is really about balancing mandatory and optional requirements. And this is more of a personal thing. I've seen this on several different projects, and a lot of RFPs come out basically, and all requirements are mandatory. So if you miss one, don't respond to one, don't fully understand one, you're not going to bid, or you're going to get DQ'd or something else. And if you really look at several of those things, you can see areas where, yes, obviously there's a critical business need for this particular requirement, and therefore it has to be mandatory. But there are other things where it could be optional. It's something that is an extra added value that you want to get. And those things can be optional. Usually I see a lot of, from my personal experience, and that's just me, a lot of them are basically all mandatories. Like I said, it does provide potential disqualifications, and like I said, the options do provide a way to expand the scope of a project in a defined way based on exercising those options or not. So, all right. With that, like I said, I'm gonna bring up Isla Parasek. Basically, she is manager IT acquisitions for California Department of Motor Vehicles. Because I'm sure y'all are all tired of hearing me talk already. How many people are tired of hearing me talk? Probably me. All right, maybe it's just me then. Like I said, Isla started her career and has been with the Department of Motor Vehicles basically since 2007. Before that, basically, she was the manager of the technology acquisition section for DGS. So she brings a wealth of procurement experience, basically, and contract management experience. And we're lucky to have her come talk to us today. So, like I said, thank you. And if you do have any questions during the presentation, please let us know.
Good afternoon. I debated whether to put that 1981 year up there or not. Didn't give away to my age, but then it lends some credibility to my experience. So, anyway, a request for information is a pretty simple document. Usually, I mean, you can make it as complex or as simple as you want, depending on what you're trying to glean from the vendor community. I have developed RFIs that are this thick in CalNet 2, and I have developed RFIs that were 2 or 3 pages long. So again, it just depends on what you're trying to get back from the vendor community. And it precedes your RFP process. And as John mentioned earlier, part of having a good relationship with your vendor is having an effective RFP, which then becomes your contract. And the RFI helps you get there in some respects. So if you are a contract manager, one of your roles is to ensure that you have competition, and the RFI helps you get competition in the market, because a lot of times you have vendors that come and they talk to your information systems people, your IT people, and they might sell an individual on a particular product. Well, so you get your purchase request and you're going, well, who else offers this product? They don't know. Well, the RFI helps you determine that. So you put a request for information out there, and you're basically polling the vendor community. Do you have this product? What does it do? Or do you offer this service? And so it's very good in helping a contract manager achieve competition. And that's, most of the time I will say, that's why we use it, at least at DMV. That's been my experience. So it also can assist with helping you develop your procurement strategy. If you've got, maybe you don't know if you want to do an RFI, or an RFP or an IFB, because sometimes an IFB is shorter and simpler, and if you know exactly what you're looking for, you want to use the IFB. If you want to have some flexibility with your procurement, or you're not exactly sure what your solution is going to look like, then you want to use an RFP. But the RFI can help you determine that, depending on the responses you're getting back from your vendor community. And also could assist with helping you build a list of potential bidders. Because you put an RFI out there, then the vendor community is on alert. Oh, something's coming down the pipe. We got an RFP or an IFB coming up, so let's keep our eyes open for that. And then you develop your list as contract manager. This is who you want to send your solicitation document to. Assist with your preparation of your solicitation document. One thing you don't want to do when you're preparing a solicitation document is you don't want to restrict or limit your bidder community. So the worst thing that you can have happen is you work all these, weeks or months on developing a solicitation document, you put it out there, and you get no responses. So, that can be a very frustrating thing. So, and oftentimes you end up having to cancel, go back to the drawing board, redevelop your RFP or your IFB and put it back out there again, and meanwhile, there goes your schedule, your project schedule. So the RFI will help you avoid that situation. And then, provides a better understanding of the current marketplace, obviously. So you know what your available products and services are. Sometimes you can use the RFI to get budgetary quotes. You don't know, maybe, how much to budget for a particular device or product or service. And so you can poll your vendor community. It's okay to ask that. You can't ask them to provide specific costs in your RFI because that's prohibited, because you can't do that until you get to the RFP process, and that's all confidential. But in an RFP or in an RFI situation, it's certainly acceptable to ask for budgetary quotes. And then also deployment timelines. We have an RFI that's out right now that we're working on, and we're looking at, in our RFI, we're looking for a product or a tool, if you will, that will help us convert assembler language, if anybody remembers what that is from back in the... We're trying to convert assembler language to COBOL, actually, and then from COBOL, eventually our plan is to convert it to modern day Java. But so we put an RFI out there because we're polling the vendor community. Do you guys have a tool out there that helps us convert assembler language? And we're looking at responses now. We're working with the vendor community. We heard through our contacts with the vendor community that, oh yeah, there are tools out there that exist. But we've had prior experience with a tool such as that didn't work all that well. So with our RFI, what we're doing is we're asking the vendors to participate in sort of a proof of concept. So we're going to give you a little bit of this assembler data, and we're going to ask you to convert it, and then give us back the results so that we can see what it does. And before we actually go out and purchase something, we're trying to save taxpayer dollars, so that we don't want to spend something on a tool that possibly doesn't work. And so the RFIs has come in handy with that particular circumstance. So that's really all I can tell you about the RFI. It can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. It's a useful tool if you have questions about your solution, or if you don't know what's out there, or you're doing market research, it's a very useful document, and that's about all I can say. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
With the pilot or proof of concept portion, does the department put out a small amount of money to fund it, or
No.
is it you do go a free route?
Yeah, it's voluntary to the responders. So, I mean, obviously, our end goal is that we're going to go out and do a purchase, you know. But at this point, no, we're not purchasing anything. So it's voluntary for the vendors to participate or not participate. Yes.
Can I ask a question? I think it depends on how complex the solution you're looking for. Do you at least do some research first, like a kind of a preliminary, what kind of a solution out there, then you can kind of narrow down what kind of information you're looking for? I
Yes.
think the balance is how much you do, because
Yes. Usually we do, because
Okay.
I mean we always know a little bit
Yeah.
before we put an RFI out there, but there's more that we don't know that we're trying to pull the vendor community for. But yes, there usually always is some market research before you do an RFI. You need to have a little bit of knowledge about what it is you're asking for, so that you can communicate it to the vendor community as well. So I used to work at the CHP
Okay, thank you.
many years ago.
Because the reason I'm asking is just the one of during the movie talked about a picture sharing, whatever. Then if you don't do market research, you are looking for, but someone will say, well, Instagram right there, right? The teenagers here. So that's like a little research. Yeah, you just answer. Yeah, thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, thank you.